Hey, discipleship groups, Matt here, walking through Mark chapter 10. And just a reminder, Mark chapter 10 is a continuation of kind of the same structure as 8 and 9, where Jesus announces and shares about his death and resurrection, but also he gives some really hard truths about discipleship. We're going to spend majority of our time talking and wrestling with what it does look like to be a disciple of Jesus. Mark begins in the first part of this chapter where the Pharisees come to Jesus trying to corner him on this issue of divorce. And I don't want to spend a lot of our time talking about this because I believe our commentary does an excellent job kind of presenting both sides from a completely biblical standpoint of this complex issue. And what Jesus makes very clear is that divorce is not God's ideal for human flourishing. But it is a part of our broken sin nature. It's a part of our broken world where it's a real thing that we wrestle with and we have to deal with because we are all broken people. But it's not the Lord's ideal. That's not what Jesus is really emphasizing here as he wrestles with the Pharisees on this. The Pharisees are trying to get him and trying to corner him into wrongly looking at the law. And what Jesus begins to expose in them is the hardness of their hearts. He's demonstrating that they aren't loving their neighbor as themselves. And they're focused on what can we get away with? How can we get really close to this line of sin? And so Jesus demonstrates the importance of loving our horizontal relationships, whether that is a marriage or any other relationship. This is significant as a Jesus follower. I think it's also fascinating. He uses women in this example as a very vulnerable population. You know, divorce was very different then, in that a man could just walk out and legally could be divorced in that moment, and leaving the women and children in very vulnerable economic situations, familial situations, all this sort of stuff. And it was a very common thing for men just to walk out. And so it's fascinating that he would use these two vulnerable populations and that he would follow this about talking about how children will inherit this kingdom and how it belongs to them. And he uses this to teach the religious elite how they're wrong. I think it's fascinating. But anyways, then we continue this discipleship theme through this passage where the rich young ruler, and actually a good portion of this text deals with, hey, how does the Lord use and how does our wealth impact our ability to pursue the Lord? And we see this rich young ruler who comes to Jesus. Jesus lists all the things, and the guy's like, man, I'm doing all that. And then Jesus says, hey, I want you to give away all your possessions, sell your possessions. And this guy walks away sad. There's a couple things. I think Jesus teaches us how to have difficult conversations. I love this phrase. He looked at and loved him. Looking at him, Jesus loved him, it says in verse 20. He says a really hard thing. And we see that this guy's heart, just like the Pharisees' heart was focused on the wrong thing, this rich young ruler was focused on the wrong thing. His wealth got in the way of him pursuing the Lord. And then Jesus begins this teaching with the disciples, talking about how difficult it is. And really what Jesus is getting at here is our possessions and our things and our status, our reputation, our resources. Anytime we want to hold on to those things and not hold on to Jesus, it's revealing an idol in the condition of our heart. We also see this as he goes into talking in verses 35 through 45 and talking about when James and John ask to be at an elevated status within the kingdom, and Jesus just goes into, hey, on the contrary, whoever wants to be great among you will be a servant. Whoever wants to be first among you has to be a slave to all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. When we think about discipleship, these three verses really help us shape our lifestyle, or how we interact with culture, is that we need to become a servant to all. We should not look to Jesus for elevation. We should look to use our life, our resources, our time, all these different things to elevate who Jesus is and what he's done for us. anytime our things, anytime even family to an extent, even our resources, our time, all these different things, anytime those things get in the way of us pursuing Jesus, it should cause us to pause and say, is Jesus the reigning Lord over my life? I love this in 1 Corinthians where it says, you are not your own, you were bought with a price. And I think for many of us, we go about our Christian walk forgetting that we've been bought with a price. We've been bought with a price, and that price has been the blood of Jesus, and we are willingly giving our lives to say, hey, Jesus, our yes is on the table to whatever you ask us, and I'll willingly go for that. How many times do we go about our life saying, you know what, Jesus, I'm willing to do this, but I'm not willing to do this? Or Jesus, how can I leverage you for gain? How many times subconsciously have we done that? How many times have we intentionally done that? And for us, I think the question is for us to begin to wrestle with, how do I interact with the world around me and become a servant to all, just as Jesus did? How do we do this? And that's a real key part of discipleship, and it's not about us. I also find it fascinating when Jesus calls the rich young ruler to give everything. He didn't call everyone to give everything. I think of Zacchaeus, who, Zacchaeus has this interaction with the Lord, and Zacchaeus' response to the grace that the Lord demonstrates to him is he gives half of everything that he owns. And I think that should be the normative of Jesus followers is if we are truly a disciple, we say, Lord, whatever I have, whatever giftings I have, whatever talents I have, whatever resources I have, how can you use them for the kingdom? Because when we do that, it reveals where our heart is, where our security is, where our hope is found. And when everything is on the table towards Jesus, it's indicating that our hope is in him. I hope you have a great time wrestling with some difficult truths in your group, and we'll see you next time.